To start, we're going to go to chapter 1, and we're going to study that life have common properties, and we're going to talk about these 7 properties: order, reproduction, growth and development, energy processing, response to the environment, regulation, and evolutionary adaptation. And I will give you some examples. I will talk about this very briefly, but in your textbook you can see more examples. And the first example is order. And if you see life, if you see any examples of life, you will see a lot of examples of organization. From a honeycomb pattern that you see in a honeycomb, uh, you will see the same patterns in fruit fly eyes. And even if you go to the cellular level, you will see all these type of organization. So I just wanted to show you that not only at the macroscopic level, but even at the microscopic level, you will see these examples of organization. And I'm going to show you an example that is not in your textbook and is not going to be in the exam, but I found that is very interesting. Scientists in 2004, these 2 scientists, they were intrigued about the organization of fruit fly eye organization. And if you see here, you can see these beautiful honeycomb patterns. And when they went and studied at the cellular level, they found even more organization. They found that inside of each eye, they found these cells that are called cone cells. And they found something very interesting, that if you see here, you have 1, 2, 3, and 4 cells. And when they found 4 cells, the configuration between cells, they look very similar to soap bubbles. So they were very interesting. Maybe this is something that is a coincidence, or maybe this is something that always happened. So, and why this happened? Maybe physical forces could be involved in the organization, in the presence of organization at the cellular level. And I'm going to show you an experiment to demonstrate that this actually happened. And I want that you stop the video for 2 seconds and think, how would you test this experiment? How would you test that actually this is not a coincidence? Yeah. How would you think that this could be something that happened every time? So stop the video and think, how would you test for that, for this idea? A suggestion: do you think that there is a way to change the number of cells? How would you change the number of cells? Okay, so let me show you how they did it. So what they do is they use genetic tools. They use mutations to modify the number of cone cells. Yeah, so for example, here you find ones that some cone cells that have 1, some of them that have still keep 4, have 4, but there are other ones that, for example, this one will have 3, and so they found from 1, they were able to find from 1 to 8. So when you use this genetic mutation, they were able to modify the number of cells. And something very interesting when they compare, this column show you the shape of the bubble, this column show you an schematic of the shape, and this show you the cone cell. And I want that you compare them. What happened when there is only one soap bubble or one cone cell? They look very similar. What happened when there are 2, and when there are 3? What happened when there are 8? And here they show you all these are only 6 cells, yeah, that have different configuration. But what it was very interesting, that in all these cases, even in this one that have 6, or in this one that have 1 to 5, always the bubbles mimic the organization of the cells found in the eye of the flies. And this is an example that shows that organization, that maybe physical forces can in many cases play a role when we find organization in life. And again, this is not going to be in your exam, it's just an example that I find that is very beautiful. Another examples of the properties of life is the reproduction, and is the ability of organisms to reproduce their own kind. And here you can see in all the cases, for example, a baby giraffe and a big giraffe, a baby koala, and this is a property that all living organisms have. Even unfortunately viruses, they use us as a host, but they are able to reproduce. Although, as you might know, we are not completely sure if viruses are alive. There is a controversy, but you and them, they reproduce. The third property is growth and development, and I'm going to show you again a few examples that are not in your textbook. Here you can see 4 different tissues that you can find in fruit flies. Here you can find the trachea, here you can find the wing of the fly, here you can find the egg chamber, and here you can find an embryo of Drosophila. And what I want that you see is that there is a lot of changes during development. And if you're interested in this topic, I am teaching a developmental biology class. So in the future, if you're interested and you want to know more about development, you can take it and we can do a research project on one of these systems. And as I said before, this is one of the type of movies that the students are analyzing. And if you want to know more about this, there is a video of the type of project that we are doing at CMU, trying to analyze this type of work and try to understand how this organization take place, how development happen, and what is the implication of this process into cancer biology. The next and the fourth property is the energy processing. And here you can see a hummingbird. You know that hummingbird, they just fly very fast, so they need a lot of food, so they take it from pollen of flowers. And we will talk a lot about this, how there is a constant energy processing in living organisms. And one good example that we're going to study is photosynthesis. And you have to write a lab report about about photosynthesis. And we're going to talk about it in the class about respiration too, that are metabolic pathways. And we're going to study at the end of the class, you will understand what are light-dependent reaction, what is the Calvin cycle, and all these different pathways. And if you're interested in these topics later with Candice, you will study in detail all the steps of the glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and we're going to talk very briefly about this electron transport change. So, but important, life require energy processing. Now, the property number 5, and number 6 are very important in Canada. Number 5 is the response to environment and is the ability to respond to an environmental stimuli. And during winter, I know that you know better than me this. You have to adapt. So some animals, some birds will migrate during winter. Some of them will hibernate. And in our case, we don't migrate or hibernate. We just stay inside and we build heaters in case of animals. So for example, they just develop some adaptation like fur that allow it to respond to the environment. The sixth one that is very important is the regulation. That is the ability to control organism internal environment within limits of that sustain life. And in the second chapter, we're going to talk about the properties of water. Water is very important for regulation for homeostasis. So we will talk about how if you drink water, it's very important because when it's hot, your body is able to remain at a constant temperature. And this not only happen in humans, but even in, for example, in the Amazon forest, the water is thermoregulating the ecosystem there. So important. Remember, response to the environment and regulation are the fifth and the sixth properties of life. Another beautiful example of migration, and I will post a video of that, is the migration of the monarch butterflies. and there will be an extra credit if you watch that video and answer a few questions about that. And finally, the last property is the evolutionary adaptation. And I know that many of you have heard about adaptation and about evolution, and possibly is one of my favorites. And I want that you watch. I'm going to play a video so you watch and you understand in more detail what is happening with the evolutionary adaptation. And it's an example of antibiotic resistance, and I hope that you enjoy it.
So what we ended up building was basically a petri dish, except that it's 2 feet by 4 feet. And the way we set it up is that there are 9 bands, and at the base of each of these bands, we put a normal petri dish thick agar with different amounts of antibiotic. On the outside, there's no antibiotic. Just in from that, there's barely more than the E. coli can survive. Inside of that, there's 10 times as much, 100 times, and then finally the middle band has 1,000 times as much antibiotic. And then across the top of it, pour some thin agar that bacteria can move around in. The background is black because there's ink in it, and the bacteria appear as white. First, you see they spread in the area where there's no antibiotic, up until the point they can no longer survive. Then a mutant appears on the right. It's resistant to the antibiotic, it spreads, until it starts to compete with other mutants around it. When these mutants hit the next boundary, they too have to pause and develop new mutations to make it into 10 times as much antibiotic. And then you see the different mutants repeat this at 100. And after about 11 days, they finally make it into 1,000 times as much antibiotic as the wild type can survive. And so we can see by this process of accumulating successive mutations that bacteria, which are normally sensitive to an antibiotic, can evolve resistance to extremely high concentrations in a short period of time.
Okay, now that you watched the video, you know that they were talking about antibiotic resistance, and here you see these numbers. In these two extremes, they show that here there was no antibiotic, and here if you see 1, 10, 100, and 1,000 is the concentration of the antibiotic. So what they did is they have a small concentration on the extremes, high concentration in the middle. So it will be a little bit toxic here in this section. Well, here it will be very toxic. In this section, it will be very toxic. So what they did, all the different bacteria was to, or this type of bacteria was to, over generations, they had mutations that allowed them to have to be better suited to the environment, and these allowed them to reproduce and pass those traits to other ones until they not only conquer the sections that they were a bit toxic, but they went to the regions that they were very toxic, in both directions. So, and this is a beautiful example of evolution. So mutations emerge, there is antibiotic resistance, and if you see this looks like a family tree. And I don't know if you remember what is a family tree. This is a family tree. Here are the ancestors, and here are another generation, and here another generation. Scientists have done the same thing. So in a family tree is a chart representing the relationship in a conventional tree structure. Here you have each one of the generations, and what we have here in each one of that dish. Here you have again the ancestors here, and here you have each one represent a different generation. And it's very interesting because this is not only applied to bacteria or maybe other organisms or only humans. This applies to all living organisms, and this is particularly important to apply to human cancer. And let me show you an example. This is an example that is very common when you study a person that have metastasis, that the cancer went from one region to another region. So what they found is that here they found a normal cell, and then the cell start having mutations in the same thing that in the bacteria there was here mutations. Then some of them start mutating and slowly differentiated, and you start creating different groups of cells that some of them they were able to migrate to their section. They were able to reproduce without any constraints. Yeah, and then you can start sequencing the DNA of each one of these cells, and you can start finding that which cells are the one that they get this property of moving to a different tissue, and which one they even continue mutating. Yeah, so you can find that they can go through metastasis, that again is going from a first primary site to a secondary region. So for example here it starts in the lungs, and it can move to the stomach, and here it can move to the brain. And this is something that is a common procedure that we are studying cancer biology. So evolution is not only important for antibiotic resistance, it's not only important theory, but it's also have a very important medical application. And this is one of the examples.